Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Let's Face It podcast. I am Samna, and for this episode, I am speaking to a highly creative and introspective and a thoughtful person who also happens to be my partner. A big shout out to him, Mark, for sharing a piece of his inner world and also for guiding me through this technicality of our podcast world. That said, thank you all as well for stopping by. May we all learn, may we all grow from each other's courage that we show. So I welcome you to the show, Mark. Just to give you a quick introduction to people who are listening about you. You are the founder of Applied Vision Baseball, Art of Baseball Productions, and co-founder of Quality at Bats Academy and Goflank. You're also a graduate of Bethune Cookman University, where you played for the Division I Wildcats. So that's a short and sweet introduction. Would you like to add anything to that or elaborate onto it?
No, you hit it right on the money. That was a perfect description of me. So that was good.
Awesome. And we'll add this to the show notes where people can find you and your work and all of that later. But let's dive right into it. So I do want to get started with art of baseball for you, right? I think one of the first thing that caught my eyes when I was going through your webpage was you write art of baseball is about going deep, and it's the mental side that you're trying to bring. So can you tell us a little bit more about what is the mental approach to baseball?
Yeah, I think growing up, in baseball, the sort of culture is to really focus on um, performance metrics as a baseball player that kind of define how well you're playing. And so there's a lot of emphasis on the end result with stats and statistics. So when I got the idea of art of baseball because I wanted to focus on what were more specific things that ball players could focus on that was within their control. So I guess the mission statement for art of baseball in the beginning was to promote personal development as a legitimate approach to success in baseball. And so that's been sort of like the ongoing theme throughout growing that as an actual business, whether it's, me selling products or training with a client one-on-one or consulting with another business within the baseball space. It's always been just trying to find interesting ways to redefine success as an athlete. Just because what specifically with baseball, it's a it's a game of failure. There's a lot of failure. And so being able to have a positive positive relationship with failure and to develop a love for adversity. I think when a player can do that, it's just another skill, another advantage. So that was sort of the idea when I created Art of Baseball, and it seems to be, as far as I can tell, it's what sort of motivates the type of content I create, and how I try to contribute, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, and the things that stand out for me, and I'm not a baseball person, I don't know much about it. I know you've tried to explain the game to me multiple times, but even then it doesn't quite sink in. But what does sink in from what you're talking about is the approach of bringing in personal development into this, right? I think that resonates across what do you call careers or life situations and things like that, where it's not just about the game, but game taken out in the context of life.
Yeah,
Right?
it's universal.
Yeah, yeah, and
Universal.
that stands out to me. The piece of personal development. What you said was it's a game of failure and the love for adversity. I think that speaks to me personally. And you said that for you when you were in the game, or I might be putting words in your mouth, but correct me if I'm wrong. But for you, when you were playing, a lot of emphasis was on the metrics of your performance. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
go ahead.
No. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. When a player tries to measure whether or not they succeeded, we have a tendency to look at our stats as a way to gauge, like a tangible result. But so much of long-term success is predicated on the intangibles, the things that we don't see. And I think the reason why it doesn't get taught as often as I think it should be is because it's ephemeral. It's really hard to explain because the experience of it's such a subjective experience and process for each individual player because each player is different. But it really comes down to, I would say, because the whole process can be surmised in one phrase. It's called the mental game, the inner game. And really, you can't have it without a certain level of self-awareness because you have to be honest with where your limits are or where your weaknesses lie. And so that can be a challenge for anybody to teach because they may not have done the work themselves.
Right.
So it's a process where it can only take place when the person that you're learning it from has actually done the work themselves. So it's really important that you have the right coaching. We can get into that maybe later, but finding the right teacher, the right mentor it's so invaluable.
Right. Yeah, and I guess since we're already going into finding the right mentor or finding the right messaging here, and that comes from an authentic place, I think, what would you say, I mean, based on your experience or what you're seeing today, what are some bad recommendations you hear in the field of baseball coaching or, in this field of expertise of yours?
Well, I think there's a lot of fair-weathered, what have you done for me lately type or a social dynamic between the coach and the player. And there's multiple reasons why that's the case. But I think one misconception or maybe something that's taught that doesn't necessarily serve ball players is the idea of what happened in the recent past is a clear representation of what's going to happen in the future, right? So, yeah, I mean, so, what happened yesterday will dictate is a reflection of what you're capable of, right? So we're taught that we should define ourselves by our past. And I think that's wrong. I think what a better model would be about setting intentions. So you become aware of what your limitations are, right? And you identify what your strengths are. And then as a coach or as a player, what you want to do is you want to work on your strengths so that they become valuable assets. And you want to work on your weaknesses enough so that they don't become liabilities. And so you can't do that when you look at yesterday and say, that happened yesterday. That's who I am, or that's what's probably going to happen in the future. And so as a coach, you have to do that work of helping them change that's a core value. So helping them change what their core value is. And then as an athlete, or as a player, you have to practice reinforcing that way of thinking because it's I don't think it's something that's going to happen overnight, and it's something that's going to require that you maintain. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds almost like a process of constant evolution where you're constantly updating, constantly maybe I'm thinking in terms of how we update our computers or our phone, letting go of what was, maybe the dead leaves, or let's say shedding that out and constantly allowing room for new things to be updated within ourselves and growing with that and not letting the past, so the dead leaves kind of suck out the journey.
Yeah.
Does that?
No, yeah, I think that's it. I mean, it's really, really hard to make lasting change.
Mm-hmm.
It's a constant effort.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that you have to show up daily.
Mm-hmm.
It's a daily practice.
Right.
So when I think about transformations, my own transformations, I can't really think of any moments where I could pinpoint and say, this is when I became a new person.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been a very gradual
Mm-hmm.
thing. And then maybe I would look back and say, oh, wow, I have changed,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, oh, it was this moment that
Mm-hmm.
I've changed. And so I think that's applicable to athletes, where they have to be patient. You know, it's not going to come overnight,
Mm-hmm.
but those adjustments that you make mentally and emotionally
Mm-hmm.
happen if you stick to the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that would probably be the next piece with what we teach in terms of redefining our definition of success.
Mm-hmm.
We have an analogy. We say that everybody wants to be put in the microwave, but nobody wants to get in the oven.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that transformation is a slow bake,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes time.
Mm-hmm. And there is perhaps no shortcut to it.
Yeah, there's no shortcuts, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, you have to sharpen the axe before you cut the tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so much of what you say, this, I know you're talking in terms of what you do through Art of Baseball, or what you're trying to give to your ball players as a message or as a work ethic or the core values that you were talking about, but it speaks to me as much. And like I mentioned earlier, I am no ball player. I'm nowhere close to that. But coming back to this, and I wanted to touch on, a lot of your coaching advice is really transferable, and there's a bunch of it that I found on your blog and through your Instagram that you put out. These are like concise posts that you make, or concise piece of writing that you do, but they're very deep, and it goes like in a universal sense. And some of it, I'm just gonna kind of name it out because they speak to me, but for people who would want to check out further, I would guide them to your website and your pages. But
Sure.
some of them are: hope is not a strategy, respect the humble grind, the sun rises. And these are like short snippets, but there is more elaboration, if you went to Mark's page and looked at it. The obstacle is the way, perfectionism is a trap, and to focus on one specific of what you've written. And I took this from your blog post, and it touches on what you were talking about earlier, where the game is about failure. So you talk about 3 ways to deal with failure and setbacks in baseball. And I'm just going to list out 3, and it would be great if you could elaborate on that for us.
Sure. Yeah.
So number 1 is use amor fati. Number 2 is return to the approach and routine. And number 3, one thing at a time. So if you can elaborate on these 3 points, on 3 ways to deal with failure and setbacks.
Well, so amar fati is Latin for love of fate. So I think so, and that's a Stoic philosophy. Sorry, I got a phone call there. So amor fati is a Stoic philosophy. It's also a framework and perspective that you could use. And for me, I think makes me think of letting go and resistance. So avoiding resistance, not trying to change the things that you can't change. So identifying what you can't control, and then the things that you can't control, finding a sort of pleasure in a way. Another way to look at it would be like what I would call like a thrival mentality. So you're switching your survival instinct, right? So the survival instinct would be to avoid discomfort or pain, and to pursue pleasure, right? And so to switch it on its head, it would be to pursue pain or to become more comfortable with pain and to see pleasure as sort of like a distraction, right? Or an obstacle towards growth. So amor fati, love of fate, is identifying the things you can't control and then loving those aspects of your life because you actually see the opportunity, right? What was the other one?
The second one is return to the approach and routine.
Okay, yeah. So like within a baseball season, you can play anywhere between 50 to 150 games in a season that lasts like 6 months long. So it's a grind. It's sort of a marathon. And so throughout that process, there's a lot of distractions. You're worried about your coach. You're worried about your performance on the stats. Your body may be breaking down because of an injury or just lack of recovery. There's so many things that could be vying for your attention that it's a challenge for you to really focus on that inner routine that allows you to stay present. And so for baseball players, that would be the fundamentals. It would be rituals that you have to make sure that you're focused on the now, not worried about the past, not worried about the future. Um, so being able to have some sort of framework that allows you to stay present is what the approach is all about because the approach is within your control, always within your control. It's a decision that you make. So it's about choosing wisely. And then the last thing you mentioned, it was one thing at a time. So again, this goes back to the distractions as ball players when we think about all the things that need to get done. And this is another universal principle when we're trying to start a project. When we are looking at the big picture, we're thinking about everything that needs to get done. It can be overwhelming, and we may be a victim to paralysis by analysis. The idea is to free yourself from that sort of stifling phenomena and to just focus on that one thing that if you can just do that one thing really well, it would make almost doing anything else less important or irrelevant. So the process really comes down to identifying what is that one thing, that one intention, and that gives you motivation in a way because you're not being stretched thin with everything else that you think that you believe that you need to do, when in reality, it may not even be important.
Right.
So
Yeah, what I'm hearing is, and then to kind of break it down in simple language, just so that it's digestible to me, and I'm making sure that I am understanding, and hopefully it translates to our listeners too. But one thing is to accept pain as the process, right? Instead of kind of choosing to go towards what's pleasurable, it's rather welcoming the pain and accepting of it, accepting of the setbacks that are to come. Second thing, what I heard was rather than allowing ourselves to be pulled into different directions, how do we ground ourselves into or finding ways to bring ourselves back and focusing on whatever, what do you call it? Whatever the sole purpose is, I guess, the intention setting piece. And then the third one is also, I think it's going back to, instead of getting frustrated or being stuck on piles of this that, you're rather kind of setting priorities to build momentum.
yeah, that's essentially it. So much of what we do is busy work. And I think one reason is because we think that by doing more, we increase our chances of succeeding. When the reality is, if we can figure out the simplest solution to get to where we want to go, that increases our chances of succeeding. Because not only is it less work, right, but it frees up that space to actually be creative or to problem solve.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something you and I we've talked about in the past, but I kind of am reminded of the 80-20 concept
Yeah.
that you've explained to me. Could you just
Yeah.
tell
Yeah,
everybody?
that's pretty much it. The Pareto principle, 80-20, it's identifying the 80% or the 20% that gives you 80% of the results, and and throwing away the 80% of what you do that only gives you 20% of the results, right? So it's about low input, high output versus high output, low input. You can call that getting rid of the busy work. You can call that focusing on, the intention of your but it's a principle. I think it's an economic principle that economists have used it as modalities in pretty much any sort of field of science. So, social sciences, psychology, um, the economy. Um, it's an interesting principle, but I think yeah, there's a book called The 4 Hour Work Week where Tim Ferriss sort of popularized that idea and made it accessible within people who were, trying to do creative work.
Right. And I'm a relational person, so I'm thinking in terms of relational, relational context. And I can see how that kind of translates into the people we're surrounded by versus, the louder noise, I guess. And one that kind of, yeah, to put it in simple words, it's like few people who are in your intimate circle versus the outer louder noise that we kind of seek towards too. Does that resonate at all, or kind of sound similar?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it through a relational lens, I guess it would be like trying to identify the quality of your relationships and then pinpointing where you can contribute and then also what you get out of it. And that's always going to be a small circle, right? Because you can only be truly, truly vulnerable and truly, truly intimate with the small group of people. I think, um, I would imagine. Um, so again, that would go back to like what your values are and how and why you'd want to spend time with certain types of people. There's a there's a really good quote: "You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." Um, so yeah, you could do the 80-20 analysis on your relationship. I think that's an essential process. Um, but within the sort of creative lens, it's about because you know during the day your your attention, your ability to pay attention, your willpower, and your motivation is a finite resource, and you're paying a price throughout the day. You're spending that resource just like you'd spend any other sort of currency. So you want to make sure that you're spending it efficiently so that what you're spending on has a return, if that makes sense. And so just like you create a budget with your finances, you should create a budget with how you focus your attention. And that would be where the 80-20 comes into play.
Yeah, and then we took the longer route there just because, um, these are principles, or these are little, let's say tidbits or tips that can be applied across aspects in our life, right? You're talking about it in terms of baseball, but I could use it in terms of relationships, or, how we use our time and our productivity throughout the day. So, going on to my next question for you, right? And this comes to, as I reflect on you or about you, in my mind, I see this person who is, always, the word that comes to mind is beginnings, right? You're always in the process of beginning, and then that's from my point of view. And just to name a few, you came to California on your own, from Florida. You started Art of Baseball on your own. You co-founded Quality at Bats on your own, and now we're at Applied Vision Baseball. You started that on your own, and your audio drama series, Joseph. It's all about beginning these things, right? It's starting somewhere. So, do you have a favorite beginning or a story that stands out, or in terms of, let me put this in a simple way, like which beginning has taught you the most about yourself and the world?
That's a really good question. Huh. I have this one memory of being in Daytona. This was like maybe 3 or 4 months before I left for California, and I had the idea to start a business. Um, and it was a baseball business. And I remember thinking, who would ever pay me for me to share with them the knowledge and experience that I've um, sort of collected over the course of my career? It was just an idea that boggled my mind, and it kind of seemed beyond the realm of possibility. And I remember thinking, like, sort of defeated, even though I hadn't even started. And that kind of goes back to the overwhelm of um, not, simplifying something or just thinking about the next step. Um, but looking back at that moment and then seeing where I am now, uh, it makes me think of the idea of you never really know unless you try. I know that's cliche, but it's really true. Just because I feel like if I were to tell that person who I was then, where I am now, or to like paint a picture of what's going on now, it would probably feel and seem like a dream come true to that younger self. So I think the lesson that I learned is that if I have a dream or something that inspires me to do, to just go for it. I mean, I have all of the confirmation that I need now. Um, so that's definitely become a part of who I am. But again, that's something that took time. It was never oh, you know, I the I had this aha moment. The light bulb went off. I understand now. I'm sure, obviously, those moments happen for people. Those flashes of insight. Those are really beautiful. But I think a better expectation for people is to realize that change is slow and it takes time, and you don't realize it's happened until you look back, until you connect the dots. That you can't connect the dots forward. You can only connect them backwards. Um, so I would say it would be that. You have to. I think it's important that when you make a decision that's about wanting to do things better or to make your life better, you have to start with something that you're aligned with. Because what's going to happen is you may have beginner's luck in the beginning, which I think is a good sign that you're on the right path. But eventually you're going to hit roadblocks and you're going to be told no. You're going to lose motivation. You're going to forget why you started this in the first place. And the only thing, apart from having good people around you to support you, the only thing that's gonna contribute to you moving forward is that purpose. Yeah, which is why I think, motivation and inspiration is it's sort of, I don't think it's as important. It's overrated. I don't think it's as important as, I guess you could say, discipline or just the commitment to the process, to showing up, regardless of whether or not you want to do it or not. If you're in alignment, if you're intrinsically motivated, you're going to hit your mark. If it's the right thing, then you're going to hit your mark. It's just it's just a matter of when. And I think for most people, they quit just before they've, you know, like pushed through that plateau.
Right. And I'm curious, right? As you're kind of painting a picture of this for you, and at the same time, what would matter, did you have any dark moments as while you're starting this for yourself? Did you have moments where you felt like, no, or I'm like hitting a rock bottom, or in terms of just something that would allow you to push forward, push forward? Was there ever a moment where you felt like this is the darkest moment?
Yeah, I've had many of them. I've um I've had moments where it was hard for me to see the progress that I've made because I was maybe comparing myself to someone else unfairly. Uh, I've had moments where I felt like I've um, invested all this time and energy, and there was nothing to show for it. I think looking back, I've started multiple projects, multiple businesses, and most of them have failed. I'm really relying on just a few projects and businesses as my career, right? I break bread by, just only a few projects that I've worked. So I think the dark moments have come when I failed to look at the things I could be grateful for and focused on what wasn't there. Mm, Yeah, I would say those were my darkest moments. And so I think having a practice of gratitude helped me get out of that. And just just getting back to reminding myself why I'm doing it. And that helps, yeah, that helps me to get back into process. If it's about contributing, then again, that's in my control. I can do something to help someone immediately. Um, and I find that when I'm aligned with that, um, those dark moments either are less impactful or they just go away.
Right. So when you say in alignment, it's being in alignment with your purpose, which for you is to um, provide your gifts to the wider world. Or
Yeah, well, yeah. To get specific, it would be to give a baseball player a piece of advice that I know that if they apply it, they will achieve progress. Like guaranteed, they will achieve progress. And then if I get any sort of positive feedback from it, like, oh man, this really helped me, then that's worth it's priceless because I know I'm making that impact. And as I get older, that has become more valuable. It hasn't become all that I need, but it's become more valuable over time, I think. To
absolutely.
do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you bring up quite a lot of quite a lot of important points. And for me, that really speaks to my heart is the part where you were sharing that you've had a lot more failures than the successes you've relied on for your career. And
Mhm.
why that speaks to me is because I grew up fearing failure. You know, it was,
Mhm.
if you fail in so and so, you aren't good enough, or it's somehow an inherent flaw in you, rather than the perspective that it's going to be a part of the process, that if you were to create something, if you were to innovate something, failure is the way to go. Well, I guess, in that sense, failure is a portal to what we call courage. um,
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's different types of failures too. There are failures that ideally you want to avoid because they're pitfalls, and pitfalls slow progress.
mm,
So
right.
there's multiple ways you can look at it. You could say everything happens for a reason, or I am who I am today because of my failures. I think a hard truth to recognize, to even acknowledge, is your life could be better had you avoided certain failures. Because what we're left with is regret, and that's a tough pill to swallow. But I think if you want to say that you know the universe is objective, and to the universe your failures mean very little, then it forces us to take responsibility, like really take a hard look at the decisions that we make. And I think it's very sobering because it forces us to realize that time is of consequence. The decisions that you make today matter. Um, and what you need is a real strategy that you can use to make your life better. And once you start that process, you can no longer rely on the cognitive dissonance of um, I'll do it when the time is right, or I'm glad that this happened because I wouldn't be who I am today. Look, that is a good way to look at something that you can't control, right? The past is the past. You can learn from it, but we have to be willing to say, and again, this is through the lens of, say, performing, that there are certain mistakes that I would rather learn by looking at the example of someone else, or I would like to leverage the knowledge of other people who are sharing their experience and try to apply it so that I can avoid those pitfalls. There's two like philosophies in business. There's fail quickly, right? Fail fast, fail quickly, break things. That's the Facebook model, Mark Zuckerberg. And then there's another one from Peter Thiel. He wrote in his book Zero to Launch, or I think it's Zero to Launch, um, where he talks about how failure is a bad thing, that you should fail less. And I think they're both right. They're sort of like a paradox of truths. And so for me, I look at it and I interpret it as there's good failures and there's bad failures. There's failures that you need to make in order for you to, experience it yourself and internalize it yourself. And then there's failures that you're just better off avoiding, you know.
I guess
And they're
there
both
is no absolute way to do certain things. And maybe, it's about creating room for both. Uh, Room for both in terms of maybe avoiding pitfalls that can be avoided, but at the same time, if it happens, moving on with openness
yeah,
to see what that failure has to give to us, or what it
right.
has to teach us.
Yeah, it's recognizing the path ahead and seeing where the pitfalls lie. But then if you fall into one, it's about that acceptance. You just got to roll with it. You're going to make them, right? You can try to avoid them, but you're going to make them.
That I think that perspective sticks more than name calling or kind of saying, it's inherently bad or, somehow you're flawed, at least for me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who might have had that in their experience too.
Mm-hmm.
Right, where the fear of falling is much bigger and greater, that it kind of keeps you in that space where you're talking about, like a paralysis place where you're not doing, then you're not creating, then you're
Mm-hmm.
not taking that first step. Okay.
Mm.
So let me redirect us to our conversation here. Another thing that I would want to talk about is your creative side. And I mentioned it earlier, just right in this piece where we were talking about you beginning things, your path to creating and starting up things, is, a big one is your audio drama series, the Jöseph. You've had season 1 come out, and with 10 episodes, it's called Jöseph. Season 1 is called The Revenge of Opus.
Mm.
So I wanted to touch on that because you have this part of you, and I think it would be fair to say that your business model or the coaching side of you is very creative as well, because it's an amalgamation of tactics and tools that players could use, but also bringing in the philosophy of it, right? Philosophical part to it. But also kind of saying, what I'm trying to say is that it shows in your business side, in your baseball coaching side, but a big part of you is also that creative side of you where, I see you write fiction. I mean, Jöseph is a science fiction, and you devote certain time of your day to, write fiction. So tell me a little bit more about that process for you.
Ooh, well, Jöseph was just a purely passion project. Um, I'm a huge Joseph Campbell guy who was a scholar, sort of like a mystic, but he really brought to light the idea of the monomyth, so mythology, and how the hero archetype is a universal cultural uh, phenomena that exists in all cultures that never had any sort of contact with each other. So it's like it's an archetype that exists within the collective consciousness, I guess you could say, of humans. And he he writes about what it means to be a hero, what that process is like, and how it manifests in storytelling. And that's always resonated with me ever since I was young. I've always been a movie buff. I love hero stories. Um, so I think for me, it was just exploring that fascination. Um, and yeah, it was fun. It was it was a screenplay that I wrote based off of like images that I would play in my head when I was 18 years old. And then it turned into an audio drama, because I wanted to tell the story, uh, and I wanted to see it come to life, and not and I wanted it to have a sort of uh, theatrical element to it because I'm a huge fan of music, scored music in movies and film. So it was just a way for me to kind of explore that and test myself. Uh, and I say that as, you know, starting a project that you're unfamiliar with, you're not sure if you can complete it, and then just sticking with it and seeing it to the end. I think I learned a lot from that because it was really challenging, and I met, you know, really cool people, really talented folks because it was a group collaboration. Um, but yeah, so it's a 10 episode series about this bounty hunter named Joseph, and it's set in the future. He has a talking motorcycle, and he has a rifle slash sword that he calls the snipe blade, and it's about these robot zombies. It's got all the bells and whistles of like a sci-fi adventure novel. Um, but yeah, and I go back to it, and I it's a way for me to explore characters in a world, um, and I'm actually there. I can actually exist there for those moments.
Yeah.
But
I'm a big fan of Haruki Murakami, you know that, but he's an
yeah,
author too, and he writes the surreal fiction books. But I think what he says, for him, the good thing about writing, or writing a novel, and for in this context, let's say fiction, science fiction, is that you can dream while you're awake, right? It's
yeah,
a dream that you
great.
can continue, which doesn't happen in our real life. Like, you can't say, I'm going to go back to yesterday's dream. But when you're
Yeah,
writing, you can go back to that dream, right? And it allows you to descend into your own consciousness. And I would add also your unconscious world. It allows you to go deep down there and then create this fantasy, which is quite not a fantasy for the writer. It's almost like a reality that
mm.
is there for you.
Yeah. I also look at it as writing in any form, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, self-help, journaling. Um, what I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to find words that are worth expressing. You're trying to get to that part of you that's saying what needs to be said in order for you to internalize ideas, thoughts. It's therapy. It's essentially therapy. All writing is essentially therapy because you're drawing connections that you weren't aware of in your mind. And so when you're writing fiction, those characters are actually just uh, they're parts of you, right? It's almost like all writing is autobiographical, um, and you are synthesizing parts of yourself through characters. And I think maybe that's why some of the best writers are so prolific, is because they identify that and they're so fascinated by that process. And so their days are just spent exploring. They're just exploring. And so maybe that's why they're not hindered by writer's block. There's nothing to be, there's nothing to block you when you're just expressing. Yeah.
Yeah. There's something about bringing into life what's inside, that comes up for me when I think when I hear you say that it's kind of letting it out, letting the words live, or letting the words letting them see the sunshine, I guess, which otherwise would just be underneath
Mm.
underneath us. And you're right, it can be very therapeutic. And I can see that transferring into like people who are more into drawing or art forms,
Hmm.
that can come parallel into writing.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can even make the argument that not just writing, but
Mm-hmm.
any sort of expression, creative expression
Mm-hmm.
that's what's happening.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay. So let me go on to the next part.
Okay.
So this goes back to Stephen Pressfield. I think you and I, we've had a number of conversation about him and his work, and we've listened to podcasts with him together and have had
Hmm.
conversation about it. But in one of his blog posts, he talks about what is called a private moment. It can be in terms of a movie or a book. And usually, to define it for folks who are listening to us, a private moment is a scene where a character, it's usually the lead, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the lead, where this character is alone with his or her or their thoughts. It's a contemplative contemplative moment,
Hmm.
and almost always, there is no dialogue. There isn't a big, like a big theatrical thing going on, but it's usually communicated through body language, let's say facial expressions, actions, and it's usually very subtle. And this quiet reflects a moment that brings in a change that's radical for this character. So they're
Hmm.
changing, not just changing, it's a moment where, what designates a life-altering moment for them, right? From this point, there is no going back. So there is no point of return. So it's that kind of moment that we see at the tip of the iceberg. Not much is happening, but underneath there is volumes happening. So have you had any such moment in your life where you've sat with your private moment, and just to put it in simple language, I guess, where you've had your moment of truth?
Mm. It's hard to say. I don't know if I've, what you said reminded me of, there's, so in Joseph Campbell, there's the hero's journey, right? In the beginning, you have the call to, you have the ordinary world, you have the call to adventure, you have the refusal of the call, you have the meeting of the mentor, the divine assistance. But eventually, the hero gets to one milestone called crossing the threshold. So crossing the threshold is that moment where you step into, the hero steps into the dark woods, or they start the adventure, and there's no turning back. They cross the ocean. This is the point of no return. At least not until you seize the sword or slay the dragon or you bring back the treasure. I think for me, those crossing of the thresholds, that experience has been so gradual that for whatever reason, it's hard for me to pinpoint the exact moment when I crossed that threshold. What I can say is that there were moments where I've said, I'm going to do something, and I set out to do it, and then I did it. I think me telling other people what my intentions were was sort of a moment of transformation, because what I'm telling other people on purpose to hold myself accountable. So there is that sort of that light that goes off that, okay, I've said it, now I'm going to do it. Um, but I can't really think of any moment where I felt like things are going to be different now. Is that what you mean when you're saying like a private moment?
Yeah, I guess it could be things are going to be different now, or a defining moment that has changed the trajectory of your life almost. Or if it
Hmm.
was going through one direction, has there been a moment where it's like, okay, well, it's a detour and there is no going
Yeah.
back, I guess.
Well, I've done psychedelics, and I can say unequivocally that that has changed me. Um, because I experienced an ego death for sure. Um, well, the realization came to me that who I am is just, it's a, I don't think it's fair to say it's an illusion, but there is a part of you that is finite, and there is a part of you that's infinite. Uh, the part of you that's infinite is goes on, but the part of you that's not doesn't. And I think when we think of the fear of death, that's what we're afraid of losing, is the part that doesn't go on. And I'm not exactly sure what that really means. It's hard for me to define, because I felt like that experience, what I took from it were things that I can only intuit now. I can only use my intuition to feel like that's what happened, or that's the nature of reality. But it changed me for sure. I realized that the things that I worry about on a day-to-day basis, you know, really don't matter. And I guess that sounds sort of pessimistic, but it's also very freeing. So I would say that that's what I took from it, and that was probably the most transformational experience that I've had that happened within, a short amount of time. Yeah. And it was much more intense after it happened, and it's like a dream. It slowly starts to fade, but I've been able, for whatever reason, been able to keep that sort of insight with me up until now.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a lot to unpack there, but something about being a speck of, it's almost like, being a speck of dust in this wide universe.
Mm.
Does that sound kind of,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the realm of what you're
that's
talking
basically.
about? Yeah,
Mhm.
and you're right.
So
It can be a pessimistic route to go, saying I just don't matter, but at the same time, it could be you're a part of something bigger.
yeah, to the objective world or to the objective universe, you don't really matter. That's the idea. But subjectively, you're all that matters. I mean, what's more important than your own life? I guess you could say the life of your family or the life of your fellow person. But what do you value more than your own experience in this world? So
So would you say it
it's a
kind of allows you to get out of self absorption, form of
yeah,
getting out of a place where it's not just about me, but rather me as a part of something bigger.
yeah, yeah. You are a part of a much larger process, and most of it's a mystery. Most of it we don't understand. Um, even all that they have figured out within the sciences and the technology, we don't know. We don't have answers to the big questions, and that hopefully can give you enough curiosity so that you could stay objective with your day-to-day problems.
Right. Yeah, I think I was just reading a little piece yesterday from a book where it talks about not to get lost in the questions, but rather play with the questions. And when the answer is to come, it will come. But
Mm,
rather approach it with curiosity and not cling or not stifle yourself
mm.
with
Yeah,
questions
yeah.
to
We tend
which,
to get in our
yeah,
way. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, and that's a real good transition point. We tend to get on our own way. Do you find yourself getting on your own way?
Oh yeah, all the time. I'm my own worst enemy. Yeah, I think I forget to check off the little things because I'm so like process or progress oriented. I forget to do the little things like just getting enough sleep, staying hydrated, um, when those things really do matter. I mean, it's yeah. So I tend to take on more than I can handle. I've gotten much better at doing that now than before. Um, I've gotten better at saying no. Um, that's having options has helped that. Mm, yeah, I think you learn. Maybe there are maybe getting in your own way is maybe one of those good failures because then what it does is it forces you to identify things that you don't want to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so that you can figure out what you do want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So as of now in your life, what do you think is a stretch? And maybe this is already something you've answered, but what's a stretch, or what's hard to do right now for you?
What's hard to do? I think like winding down, letting go, being bored, doing nothing, not having an agenda for the moment. It used to be so easy when I was younger. I could just get there immediately. And now it requires setting boundaries, and it requires being okay with feeling what I would define as lazy. Um, because I know that it's important to recover, because then that's the only way you're going to be at your strongest. But I think there's this scarcity mindset where I think I need to do more. Again, it goes back to these are things that I know, but I have to practice them.
Right.
It's never gets easy.
Right. Right.
Never gets easy. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you were saying early on too, and it's a practice, it's a slow process, and it's about showing up over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So let me just get back to the part where you were saying that as a kid it was easier to disconnect and be bored and to just do nothing, right? So tapping into that part, because for me I find deep fascination with our inner child that we all carry, but also our childhood. And for just the purpose of this question, we're only tapping into something that would be resourceful or an inspiration that we bring from our childhood, because for a lot of us, childhood is a complex part of our life. It has a lot of pieces and layers to it, which can bring up the goods, but also painful parts. But just to tap into the resources or the inspiration part to it, what's something that you bring from your childhood to your present life? And just to give you an example, it could be a piece of memory, a fantasy, a delight, important lesson, something that you like to play with, or anything like that.
What's something from my childhood that I bring to my hmm that's a interesting question. You know, when I was like, let's say like 6 or 7, I remember my class, we took a field trip to the Sanger Theater, which is what it was like an auditorium in downtown Pensacola, where I was raised. And there was an orchestra that played that day. And so we listened to the orchestra, and I remember they were just before the performance started, they were, you know, getting warmed up, and so they were playing their instruments, making sure everything was tuned. And as soon as the music started, I remember seeing visions like of like a movie in my mind. And for the longest time, I thought maybe I would do something related to like storytelling or film, which is was one of the main motivations for Joseph. But I think that was probably the first time I experienced passion. I think that was at least my earliest memory of experiencing passion. And I think that comes into play now by um, using music as a way to motivate myself. Mm. I mean, I know there's a whole like science-based explanation to what music does to us on a physiological level. That's probably happening there. But I get so much out of orchestrated music that's always been able to make me feel positive emotion. Mm. So I would say that's probably something that I took from my childhood.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's a beautiful piece. When you say the passion that you tap into, have you ever, or, do you feel like you can locate that in your body at all? Is it a physiological experience when that you experience, and in that moment of your childhood where you're, talking about they were preparing and you're having this vision? Anything like that?
I don't know if it's anything that I can tap into. I mean, I think it only happens when I'm listening to music, like it is for most people. I don't think it's what happens is anything unique. I think we've all gotten lost in a song, and it can make us feel bold or sad, even, or just something that that makes us feel that we're here, we're alive in the moment.
So we're here, we're alive in the moment.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think I remember there was somebody who had a critique. No, it wasn't a criticism, but it was a critique of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. It might have been Joseph Campbell who he said that I think where Viktor Frankl was wrong. I don't think we're all in a search for meaning so much as we're in the search for the experience of being alive. And I don't know. I mean, I could see how meaning is sort of the end game, but I think when we all look back at moments where time seemed to stand still, uh, those are the things that we look back on, and it reminds us that life is worth living. I think the meaning piece gives us that sense of positive expectancy about the future. So maybe they're both true, but one sort of exists in your past and the other exists in your future.
Right. Right. And as you were speaking, I was wondering, and this is just in my own head, kind of putting the pieces together. I wonder if it is those moments of feeling alive that also contribute to the meaning in our life. It's almost like building blocks of those moments leading to jigsaw puzzle pieces that when it's put together, it kind of allows us to see how things are coming together and we make meaning out of it, maybe.
Could be, yeah.
Could be. Okay, so I mean, we could go down that route, but I am gonna reroute us here. So one last big question before we move on to our rapid fire section. So you brought in, kind of redefining success multiple times as we were talking about it. So getting personal for you, what's your definition of success now, and how has it evolved?
Ooh, my definition of success. I have a list of like small things that I try to get done. They don't get done every day. I fall short on some days, but for me, it's my ideal day is to do something that's creative. Take it, like literally take a step forward in some sort of creative endeavor. And the quota is, uh, you know, a certain amount of words, right? They can be shitty, doesn't matter as long as they're there. Put in the work that day. So it's doing something creative, it's doing something with my body that's challenging, whether it's some sort of Obviously I try to run every day, put something challenging physically, eat something healthy, and do something. Put something, like, have some sort of positive input, whether it's a piece of knowledge or positive influence. Um, and if I'm able to do that, I can consider my day successful. That's my definition of success, and that sort of expands and contracts. I replace certain things with other things. Maybe it's making some sort of connection with someone, contributing, or showing some sort of gratitude. Uh, but for me, success is always within the bubble of something I can't control. It's the choice that I make, and that's what allows me to keep the foot on the pedal,
Hmm. And what about the
per se.
piece that's beyond your control? How do you make peace with that?
Uh, I mean, I don't know if peace per se is attainable, and the reason why I say that is because the dissatisfaction is sort of what drives you, right? Yeah, we're motivated by sort of irritability, right? That's what gets us going. Um, but I think just accepting, but so yeah, peace in the form of acceptance. I think you just realize, yeah, there's nothing you can do about the things you can, and it doesn't take. It's not very hard for you to identify what you can't control. It's not. You just have to see it for what it is
Right,
and be honest.
right. Yeah, and I think I hear you in terms of maybe peace might not be the right word, or maybe so much as maybe sometimes it is almost like sparring with it or dancing with it, or maybe it's going back and forth and the tassel, I guess.
You've been listening to a lot of Naval Ravikant lately, and there's something he said interesting. He said, I think it was something about suffering and desire, and how he looks at it is, for him, he will set boundaries for what he allows himself to be dissatisfied with, and he chooses one thing, right? Um, and I think that there's something to that. It's like, okay, you only have a certain amount of hours in the day, and you only have a limited amount of willpower, motivation, and attention throughout the day. So you can't do everything. You would be a fool to try. So you have to choose what to be dissatisfied with. Hmm. I think for me, it's my number one priority is building a life that supports everyone. I take that on as like a challenge. So that how would that look would be, um, growing my business so that I'm able to help more people. That's what that looks like, and making that my main priority. So that means, maybe I won't be a best-selling author. I won't write a volume of books, or it may take longer, or I will not be in uh, as good a shape as I was when I was in college. Even though try to work out every day, or there may be days where I struggle with sleep. You know, everything. Not all of it's going to be perfect. I'm going to have to make certain reservations and make sacrifices. But if I can say, this is like the thing I'm going to be dissatisfied with, I'm going to allocate most of my energy towards that. And it's going to change. It's going to change. But it goes back to the overwhelm piece. If we're trying to change everything at once, we will probably make less progress in everything. Another analogy would be like if you had a lot of debt, right? You had multiple credit cards. What you would probably do is you would identify the credit card that had the highest interest, and then you would pay that off first. Then you address the next thing.
Right. Right. I guess it's about focusing on one thing you can do and giving your best at it as right. Yeah. And I'm soaking all of that in, so just taking a moment to
How about
take
you?
that in.
What does success look like for you? How do you define success?
That's a good question. I think for me too, it has changed over time. And at this time of my life, or at this point of my life, success for me would be having a meaningful relationship, whether that be in the realm of my clients that, right, currently I'm not seeing clients, but I was, and just having a rapport with them where I feel like I'm creating a safe container for them and they feel that is communicated. And I'm able, if I'm able to build that for my clients, if I'm able to build that within my relationships where my loved ones, my people around me feel safe with me and I feel safe with them, I think for me that makes me feel like I'm successful at what I'm doing.
That's interesting. So I would imagine that process requires two people. So how do you manage when where someone's maybe not doing their part, or they don't seem to be ready to take on what you're willing to contribute?
Yeah, and I've actually experienced that. And I think back to the words of my supervisor, our clinical supervisor, who would tell us that, this is right from the beginning of grad school, where therapy, being a therapist or creating a therapeutic space is all about bringing, let's say if there is a pie here, there's two pieces of the pie, let's say 50%, 50%. You're only responsible for the 50% of your pie. And as long as I am bringing my 50%, and I guess it goes back to what you were talking about, is focusing on the things that you have control over and doing what you can in that context, right? So I feel like if I can tell myself at the end of the day I brought in my 50% of the pie, then that's still a success. But although I do tend to reflect, or I do tend to reflect on where the disconnect was and how can I again refresh or renew that 50% of my pie and take it so that I meet the person where they're at.
So it would be obviously showing up, doing your part of the work, and then seeing where you could adjust to meet them where they're at. And then that's where it ends.
Yeah, and I guess when you put it that way, and there are ways that I could adjust, but not at the expense where I feel like it's not authentic to me. Does that make sense? It's not in a way where I'm placating or where I'm like always trying to live up to the client's expectations or something like that, where it's like standing up to my truth, but at the same time kind of doing a nice checking in to see the empathy that I'm trying to convey. Was it really there, or was I going through certain kind of my own processes that, maybe in the surface level, I feel like, no, it wasn't there, but maybe deep down, I did have something going on or something like that, just to kind of go in and check in with myself. So that's the process for now.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So are you ready to go into our rapid fire?
Yes.
So this will relatively be quicker, but unless I feel like, I do want to sit with it just a little bit, maybe we will.
Okay.
But let's go ahead and get started with, what are you excited about?
Ooh, I'm excited about being able to go to movies again. I miss the theater. I miss being able to eat at our favorite restaurants. We have a handful of restaurants we haven't been able to go to. I have a few projects that I'm working on with Applied Vision Baseball, one of the companies that I started. We are getting into the VR space. So we have this whole new VR virtual reality feature that we're trying to launch soon. Really excited about that. I'm excited for the summer, for the weather to start warming up. Yeah. I'm excited about finishing this book, The Daily Stoic.
Right.
That's a good book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot to look forward to.
There's a lot to look forward to.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Now I'm going to bring your excitement a little down to, what are you afraid of?
I'm afraid of I think most of my fears are universal. So I'm afraid of losing my loved ones. It's as my parents get older, I'm starting to see that they are being forced to experience a transformation of their identity as they get into older age, because they're growing more dependent on others. I think I fear that I'm not able to make that experience one that they can enjoy, for a whole list of reasons. So yeah, those provide challenges. I'm afraid of, I think fear can be a really good motivator. So I use it as one. So I think the idea of like falling short or not reaching my potential is an idea that is like a memory or future memory that I simulate, a scenario that I simulate in my head, and it's a scary thought, and I think that maybe pushes me forward. Yeah, maybe those are my two biggest fears.
Right. And I can definitely resonate to both of those. Yeah. What's an ordinary moment that gives you true joy? And if you can describe this one,
Moments.
like a storyboard.
Yeah, an ordinary moment that gives me joy. One of my favorite books is a book called The Peaceful Warrior, and it's about
The Peaceful Warrior.
Yeah, The Peaceful Warrior. It's written by Dan Millman, and it's a book about his experiences in college. He was a gymnast, and he had this mentor, and he called him Soc, as in Socrates, because he was like this guy who pretty often would espouse like quotables. He had a lot of profound things to say. And one of my favorite quotes in that book was, "There are no ordinary moments." And I don't know if that's like me just like dunking on your question, but
Mm.
if I had to pick an order, like what you could perceive as an ordinary moment,
Mhm.
um, it would be like us sitting on the floor, binging Office and eating dinner.
Mhm.
Those are like things that we do daily. Those are daily things that we
Right.
do.
Mhm.
So in that way, it's ordinary,
Mhm.
but they're not ordinary.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I would choose that as the ordinary thing that gives me joy.
You know what? I think what just came to me is what we were talking about. It's these things. I forget the exact quote that we were getting to, but moments of feeling alive in, let's say, in, for the lack of a better word, moments of feeling alive in ordinary moments that actually maybe add on to meaning, a bigger meaning in life.
Mm.
I don't know. I'm just putting that in perspective. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I think too often and I mentioned this in my last episode too, is too often it's easy to overlook what's there right ahead of us, but adds a lot of value or a lot of joy into our lives, right?
Mm.
In pursuit of bigger things in life. That when I get there, when I achieve this, when I, do this, I'll be happy, rather than saying this is what I have right here, right now. And perhaps I can find gratitude or joy or peace in them, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It goes back to what you were talking about, how, those were the things that you practiced, was finding gratitude in what was ahead of you.
Mm.
Right. Okay. So, and you brought a book. So what's a book that's indispensable for you, which will always be a part of your, the fabric of your growth?
Ooh, there's so many books that when I think of the idea of reading, some of the books that were like pivotal or first times in terms of them introducing concepts that have impacted me. I think The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho, is an obvious one, sort of kind of cliche. Um, just because it's a story about, Santiago, who's the protagonist, and he obviously goes through. I mean, it's really clear that he goes through that whole hero's journey arc. And then, spoiler alert, what he's searching for is actually buried beneath the ground that he's sitting on when he has the motivation and inspiration to start the journey. So he has a dream about the treasure while he's shepherding sheep, and he's sitting under a tree, and the treasure is actually buried underneath the tree that he's leaning on. But he goes on an entire adventure. He even like he meets all different types of characters. He meanders. He has an impasse. He forgets what the journey was about, and it all culminates. It ends up with him being in that same exact spot. The the end of the journey is where it began. Um, I really like that. Um, the 50th Law by Robert Greene is a really good book. It's not his most popular one, but it's my favorite. It's about transcending fear. It's a book that he co-wrote with 50 Cent. A lot of people, I think, sleep on that book just because they see 50 Cent as a rapper or as like a business person and not necessarily an author, but it's a really, really good book. It's a really good book.
And maybe you can add one more, and then we'll.
Ooh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Every like 2 or 3 years, I reread The Servant of the Bones. It's an Anne Rice novel,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about this young man who lived during the Babylonian era,
Mm.
and a witch puts a curse on him that turns into a genie and he's in prison in these bag of bones. I really like that book because Anne Rice, she does a really good job of painting the picture of what daily life was like during the Babylonian era. And I've always, every time I read it, I see it through a new lens.
And what does it do for you? Does it provide you some perspective, or why does that book stick?
I don't know. I think it could be just a matter of me just overlooking certain things, and I picked them up the second time around, the third time around. But then also certain verses speak to me differently because through experience, I have a different perspective or have context. I don't know if I don't know if there's like a clear answer as to like how it's different. It just feels different. Makes me feel different.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what's a routine in your life as of now that is a non-negotiable for you?
Ooh, well, Monday through Friday, I try to run. I feel weird if I don't run.
So running.
Running and some sort of caffeine in the morning. I can't. It's hard for me to write without some sort of caffeine.
Right.
I just don't have that mental juice. Those would probably be my two non-negotiables. Where if they don't happen, the day doesn't go the way it should.
Yeah. What about what's a quote or an idea or a question that you've been mulling over lately?
A quote that I've been mulling over lately. You know, I try to read as much as I can, and lately I've been reading The Daily Stoic. That is a book that's full of quotes. I don't know if there's like a specific quote that I can just like ring off the top of my head, but I think the idea of that whatever dreams that you have or aspirations that you have, it's not going to be enough in terms of fulfillment. And if you need any proof, just look at all of the successful people in the world who experience a fall from grace. They seemingly have hit the epitome of success, fame, and fortune, and notoriety. And they succumb to depression, self-sabotage, and toxic relationships. So much so that it's almost a cliche. And I think the lesson that we could draw from that is there's a media bias that says success is what will make you happy. But if you pay attention to the people that are successful, you realize that their struggles go beyond that. And it's something that we all have to be prepared for.
Right.
And the solutions are for everyone. But it's an inner journey that's subjective. And I think it starts with telling the truth. So maybe the quote that I've been pondering is, and this is a Jordan Peterson quote, it's always tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And yeah, I think two things can almost be a cure-all for the solutions in your life, in my opinion. I think it's taking massive action,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you tell the truth, you can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to lie to yourself, especially when you're quiet.
Right. It is. And I think even in that quietness, you wage a war with yourself if that truth doesn't, if it doesn't come out from, especially for ourselves.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good exercise to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
there's the adage, the truth will set you free.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's deeper than that. It's not just that the truth will set you free. It's the truth will show you what next step to take,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So you're confused about what you should do next.
Right.
Just tell the truth.
It's a tough one though for a lot of us. Because I think a part of the truth is also the acknowledgement or the acceptance of pain for a lot of us.
Sometimes when you ask for the truth, the answer is I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also an answer.
To not know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's keep that as a silent moment to let that sink in. Yeah. All right. Going with silent moment, I guess. What does silence bring up for you? What does silence bring up for you?
Silence brings up for me. What does silence bring up for me? I think it depends on like where I am when I'm silent.
Mm-hmm.
I think at nighttime, like if I wake up and I have to go pee, it's pretty silent, and I think of the void, or I think of my mortality. I think of the finiteness of time, of the time that I have. Sometimes that gives me a sense of urgency. Sometimes it's sort of an existential experience.
Okay.
But yeah, when I get quiet, typically that's what happens. Is I think of
mortality.
Yeah.
What is a quiet signal that we, in general, as humans, that we must all be listening for?
Ooh, I mean, being able to listen to your gut, literally. Like there's I think that there is some connection between your brain and your stomach. That's very telling, being able to listen to that, I think, is a valuable skill. I think we call it butterflies in our stomach.
Yeah.
I think there's like some sort of intuitive thing that happens
Right.
when we think of something that could be inspiring or something to avoid. But I also would say listen to your body. When you're in pain for a reason. Usually the pain, or oftentimes the pain, physical pain is related to an emotional, it's an emotional factor.
Yeah, I think It's a book I have yet to read, but it's from Gabor Mate, right? He talks about when the body says no, like the pain is trying to communicate something to us if we listen to it, if we sit down to listen to it closely. Okay. So, for lastly, what words of wisdom would you like to leave us with?
What words of wisdom? Shoot. Wisdom. You know, I think what I said earlier about how massive action can be a cure-all, I think that's so true. Being able to identify that one thing that can move the needle. I also would say, you know, we underestimate what we can accomplish in a year. Or sorry, we overestimate what we can accomplish in a year, but we greatly underestimate what we can accomplish in 2 to 5 years. I think if your life can be transformed and look completely different if you just put in the work. So I would say, if you refuse to give up, it'd be impossible to fail. That would probably be.
If you refuse to give up, it would be impossible to fail. So I think it goes back to what you were saying, constantly showing up, constantly putting in the work with intention, and maybe inviting acceptance of whatever that process would open up.
There's going to be things that you can't change, and you have to practice letting go of those things. Won't be easy. You'll fall short many times, but if you see it as a journey, then you'll realize that it doesn't have to be perfect. Because the best stories are the ones where there's challenges and setbacks, and there's you know, where the hero hits rock bottom, or there's no hope. Those are the best stories. So if you can see yourself as being in that same process, then you have what you.
And that for me is, well, for us is a great place to close, because that rock bottom, I think, that you're talking about, I think we all experience at what point, or at one point or other in our life. And if we can, which we will, connect through these stories, then that serves the purpose. So with all that, thank you so much for spending time with me, chatting here. Where can people find you and your work?
I mean, I am most active on Instagram, so Applied Vision Baseballs. I don't really log into Instagram that much on my other accounts. But yeah, if anybody wanted to ever reach out, Applied Vision Baseball would be the one where I would see the message. If there's any baseball players out there who want to train their pitch recognition or want to train the mental side of baseball, then they can go to appliedvisionbaseball.com or qualityabatsacademy.com. And
even for non-ball players, I think so much of your work is not about fixating in the words, but rather what it means, the process that brings out for a lot of us. And some of it are specific to ball players, I would imagine, but I learn a lot from them too. So anyone who would be interested in that could go check it out. And that's a wrap, my friends. Thank you for sticking around. I will add up the show notes with Mark's information, where to find him, his social pages, as well as the book references he's made, and without forgetting his audio drama series, Jöseph, that you should all check out. Thank you.